Hello everyone, and welcome to the UKIVA Machine Vision Conference webinar series. My name is Jim Sullivan. I work for Imperx, and today I'm going to speak about the advantages of using rugged IP67 cameras in industrial applications. Cameras can be found almost everywhere, from the intrusive devices that we all carry around in our pockets, to doorbell cameras, to vehicles, and in many places there are cameras installed to help people do their jobs more effectively. However, not everyone sits in an office or in a lab where the environment is pristine, and not all cameras are protected from shock, vibration, and particulates, whether those be solids or liquids. Imperx cameras are among the industry leaders in producing cameras that will withstand high shock and vibration environments. I can't think of anything more extreme than being strapped to the side of a rocket ship and launched into space, which Imperx cameras routinely do. But until now, the particulates could be a limiting factor on how and where the cameras could be used. You could take a camera and put it inside an IP-rated enclosure, but that adds size, weight, and cost to the imaging system, to say nothing of having to figure out how to connect the camera to both power and to either a computer or a data recorder where your images would be saved. But our new IP67 rated cameras, ranging in resolution from 2.8 megapixels to 12 megapixels, greatly simplifies the protection of the camera with minimal impact to size and cost. Before we go any further, I'd like to take a moment to be sure that everybody knows what IP actually means. The International Electrotechnical Commission, or IEC, developed the Ingress protection standard as a way to give a measurable definition for waterproof and dustproof and what those mean. If you say waterproof, does that mean that you can drop water onto the device, spray water at it, submerge it in a bucket, drop it into a lake? For dustproof, how small of an object can find its way into the device or IP-rated enclosure? Well, the Ingress protection standard quantifies these two characteristics. There are two digits to define the IP or Ingress protection for a device. Let's start with the first digit, which relates to solid ingress protection. It defines the level of protection that the enclosure provides or the device provides against access to hazardous parts, such as electrical parts, moving parts, body parts, essentially the ingress of any foreign solid object. You can see that the scale runs from 1, which is protection from contact with any large surface of the body, such as the back of your hand, all the way up to 6. The increase in value shows increasing protection from objects. When you get to 5, you have partial protection from harmful dust, and you can see that 6 is full protection from any harmful dust. The second digit of IP relates to water ingress protection. It defines how well an enclosure protects water from entering or the enclosure of the device. The range of water protection goes from 1, where there is protection against vertically dripping water, and moving up the scale, you can see that it protects from water coming in at slight to steeper angles, to sprayed and splashed water, to protection from water jet streams, finally to 7 and 8, which allow for the complete immersion of the enclosure or device in water. In summary, you can see the full range of IP or ingress protection. I guess it really starts with IP00, which is not rated or absolutely no protection, up to IP69, which will be full protection from dust and particulates and full protection against high temperature water jets. The Imperx IP67 rated cameras means that you're fully protected from harmful dust and that you can actually submerge the camera to depths of up to 1 meter for up to 30 minutes without affecting the use of the camera. It'll still operate. So now we know that an IP67 camera enclosure will seal and protect its contents from dust and water, submerged at a depth of 1 meter for up to 30 minutes. In the imaging world, there are certainly applications where the cameras can be exposed to elements, or are in environments where dust, debris, and water could be present. In these situations, you must protect the camera, optics, and electronics from any or all of these that exist, or you run the risk of damaging your equipment. Imperx has introduced a line of PoE or Power over Ethernet cameras that are such protected. I guess really there's two approaches to making the camera IP67 compliant. The first will be to just take the camera and, as I've alluded to before, put it inside an IP67 rated enclosure. There are a number of drawbacks to that. First, you would likely be purchasing from two different companies. Then someone has to put the camera inside the enclosure, adding time and cost. Also, the enclosures can be quite large or heavy, and if you only have a small envelope in which to install your camera, or if you're trying to minimize weight, then that could be a limiting factor for success in your application. You might not be able to put the camera where you want to, so that you can get the best image of your process. The second approach would be for the manufacturer to integrate the IP67 camera into the camera compliance into the camera itself. By effectively sealing the camera, you can save the space and weight of the separate enclosure, save money, and let your customers procure from a single supplier. Here you see our solution. The ruggedized camera has its critical electronic components in a sealed housing, and we have a tube that surrounds and protects the lens from the contaminants as well. There are rubber O-rings that are used to seal the length of the tube, and we have an oleophobic coating on the front glass so that water and debris do not stick to it. But that just addresses the components that are needed to take the images. What about the back side of the camera and getting power to the camera and getting data out from the camera? To ensure the camera gets its power and outputs the data properly, we've selected some IP67 rated M12 connectors to interface to the camera. There are two connectors on the back of the camera. The camera ships with caps over the connectors, and of course we put a warning label across the caps telling you that you need to either have the cap in place or have a proper cable connected to ensure the IP67 rating is maintained. The camera is power over Ethernet, so you can choose to use only one of the connectors, the data port, which would give you power over the Ethernet with the PoE injector. If you utilize either an input, such as a trigger to trigger the camera, or an output to strobe a light, or if you want to provide an external power supply or power source, you would use both of those ports. Here you see a close-up of one of the connectors that we use, as well as a couple of sample cables. If you're using the PoE capability, you would just have an RJ45 connector on the opposite end, assuming the computer or injector that you're using does not need to be in that same protected area and doesn't need the IP67 rating. So now that we've talked about the camera and the outputs, I'd like to spend a little bit of time speaking about the importance of the enclosure surrounding and protecting the lens. In some respects, this enclosure is even more important than protecting the camera and the data, because if this component is not properly selected, it would adversely affect your image. So lenses come in all different form factors. They can be short or long, large diameter or small diameter, wide angle or telephoto. You should know a lot about the lens properties when you get to the point of selecting your how to enclose your lens. First, and obviously, you have to physically fit the lens inside the enclosure. Some lenses have thumb screws that are used to secure the iris or focus settings, but once the lens is inside the enclosure, the thumb screws are not necessarily required. You could replace the thumb screw with a set screw, which minimizes the OD of the lens and minimizes the diameter of the lens enclosure that you use. You won't have access to the iris or focus anyway, so just use the set screws, set your lens, and then put it inside the enclosure. And next, but more important and less obvious, is the need to understand the way that the lens will image so that you can get the length of the enclosure set up properly. Because if you don't, you could end up vignetting your image and not getting the full resolution out of your camera. I'd like to say a few words about vignetting. I'm pretty sure that everybody knows what vignetting is, but just to be safe, what I'm really saying is you don't want the enclosure to vignette or clip your image. Normally, when people talk about vignetting, they will talk about seeing dark spots in the corner of your picture, as you can see in the examples that I have. This can happen when the lens image circle doesn't fully cover the sensor. You can also have vignetting because of the natural tendency of the lens to, it's called relative illumination as you move further away from the center of the lens, where its thickness, the glass is thickest, and you get your best optical performance. As you move towards the edges, the glass gets thinner, and the light that you get out to the edges of the image will sometimes just darken naturally. That's because the lens doesn't perform as well out of the corners as it does in the center. But that's not what I'm talking about when I talk about vignetting. What I'm talking about, vignetting with respect to the enclosure that you use, is you want to be sure that the clear aperture, or that really the front window, is of the right size and at the right location from the front of the lens. The enclosure must not only encompass the lens, but it must be short enough or close enough to the front of the lens so that you don't block out any of the light that's coming in. Here's a quick example. You see on the left a short focal length lens, and on the right a longer focal length lens. Doesn't matter what the focal length actually is, just that one is shorter, one's longer focal length, and you can see the difference in the angle of view that's coming out of the lens. The shorter the focal length, the wider your angle of view is going to be, and the longer the focal length, the more narrow or smaller your angle of view is going to be. For longer focal length lenses, you can see the enclosure is usually much easier to design. Because the angle of view is small, the chance of the enclosure blocking any of the light coming in is also small. You don't want to make the enclosure too long, but that's not really that much of a concern, and you can get away with keeping it something reasonable. So here's that same enclosure put onto a shorter focal length or wider angle lens. You can see the impact of selecting the enclosure diameter that's too small for the shorter focal length. This is obviously a little bit exaggerated, but in principle you can see what I'm trying to get to. Particularly for short lenses, for focal lengths of 8 millimeters, 5 millimeters or shorter, the angle of view can be quite large. So you have to make sure that the diameter of your enclosure and surrounding the lens is big enough to let all that light come in. By using some trig functions, you can calculate the theoretical angle of view. I say theoretical because sometimes the lens distortion will actually make the angle of view even larger. But once you know what your angle of view is, you can project how far away from the lens you need to be and how large of a clear aperture you need. This is essentially the size of the window that you need to put onto your enclosure. And you size the length of the tube so the clear aperture diameter is far enough from the front of the lens to allow the light to enter. And here we're right at that limit. You can see the edges are just coming in at the corners of the enclosure. So where might you want to consider using IP67 rated cameras? Some examples include in extreme environments where there's high humidity. The camera might be exposed to weather, such as rain or sleet, or where there's high dust in the air. It might be important to note that the IP67 enclosure is dust-proof, but it should not be used in environments where your camera needs to be explosion-proof. That's an entirely different spec and is not covered by the IP rating scale. You might want to keep outside material from impacting the camera, such as in cutting applications where there could be shavings in the air. Some markets where you might consider an IP67 camera include the oil and gas, transportation, automotive, toll collecting enforcement, aerospace, manufacturing, security, military, and many, many more. Essentially, any place that isn't a pristine environment could be a good candidate for an IP67 rated camera. And even, some laboratories where you might think the environment would be pristine, even those labs can be candidates if there's enough particulate or moisture in the air. In many industrial applications, there's a growing demand to automate your processes, and monitoring and controlling these processes are critical to your success. Your process may operate in wet conditions, under high vibration, near chemicals, or in extreme temperatures. This automation can lead to increased pressure on production and motion control systems and the cameras that monitor these systems. An IP67 camera can help you overcome these harsh environmental challenges. But beware if the enclosure needs to operate in extreme temperatures. The IP67 enclosure may not help if the camera is not able to survive in those same temperatures. For example, if your camera only has an operating range from 0 to plus 30 C, or if you don't know what the camera's operating temperature range is, you can't assume that by putting it in the enclosure that the enclosure is going to provide any additional protection. Imperx cameras, on the other hand, more than cover the wide temperature ranges. Many of our cameras operate from minus 30 C to even plus 70 C on the high side. So if you take the approach of putting an enclosure around your camera, you want to make sure you check with both the camera manufacturer and the enclosure manufacturer to make sure that both are going to survive the environment that you've got. Here are just a few industrial applications where IP67 cameras could be beneficial, whether they be industrial robotics or food and beverage processing, packaging, process control systems, semiconductor manufacturing, factory automation, material handling systems. Any of these could be good examples of where an IP67 camera can be used. I'd like to talk about a few of these quickly, just to talk about different applications. I'm going to start with the oil and gas industry. This industry faces challenges with an increased demand for natural resources. These industries operate in harsh conditions, whether they be extreme temperatures, high vibration, high shock, etc. An Imperx IP67 rated camera can withstand these harsh environments. Some of the specific applications in this industry could include inspecting pipes or security of videos, oil rig surveillance, etc. The food and beverage industry is another area where IP67 rated cameras can be used. This industry has areas where there's extensive cleaning, whether it's by washing an area down using disinfecting solutions, and splash zones certainly can exist. Machining and metal processing industry is another possible market. There can sometimes be oil in the air, and the IP67 enclosure may help with this. In addition, there can be debris, fumes, heat, and sparks where the enclosure can protect the camera system from the environment. Automotive and general manufacturing applications can include areas where gases and sparks, metal particulates, and dust, humidity can be in the air. Again, the IP67 rated camera or enclosure can protect and ensure the success of your application. Another area where there's high contaminant environments, where there's a lot of dust or particulates in the air, is another great opportunity to use an IP67 camera. For example, cameras that could be installed in silos or grain elevators, or for live feedback, or for fill levels in tanks. Keeping debris off the cameras is important. To review, an IP67 rated enclosure provides for the survivability of the camera, allowing the cameras to be installed and to operate in areas where a non-protected camera just simply could not. It provides reliability of performance, ensuring the electrical, mechanical, and optical components of the system remain contaminant-free and stay operational. And it protects the lens and the camera from the external harsh environment. The Imperx solution, IP67 camera, can provide a good cost savings when comparing it to the need to purchase a separate housing. It provides a controlled environment for the camera and for the optics, and it can minimize the overall footprint required when compared to using a separate housing. Again, allowing you to put the camera in a place where you might not otherwise be able to fit the larger enclosure. So when choosing a camera, particularly for environments where the environments are harsh, you want to be sure your camera is protected, but that also it will survive in whatever conditions you may have. You need to consider what type of contaminants the camera will need to endure, and choosing the IP67 rated camera from Imperx will protect from water and dust ingress. But for particularly harsh environments, you may come across extreme temperatures, as we've talked. And many Imperx cameras will operate from minus 30 or even lower to plus 70 C because of the industrial grade components that we use. Your application may require a camera that can survive high shock or vibration. Imperx cameras are designed to withstand 20 G of shock and 100 G of vibration. Imperx is ISO 9001 certified, so you can be sure you're getting the same quality product again and again. So I hope that I've helped you if you come across an application where you want to decide what to do about a camera that needs to be installed in a harsh environment. The integrated Imperx IP67 rated camera provides a lower cost of ownership, eliminating the need for separate housing, reduces the camera and lens failures that you would otherwise see in those kinds of environments, and increases your long-term reliability with our quality products. We hope that you will see fit to choose the Imperx IP67 rated camera when the time comes. So here's a little bit about me, and if you have any questions, you can contact me. My email address is jims@imperx.com, or you can just log on to the Imperx website and ask questions there. I hope that you have found this productive and beneficial to you, and I hope that everybody has a great day. Thank you very much for your attention.